Let's start this session looking at software source code as part of memory of the world. And I've got four distinguished speakers that will help us to handle that topic from different vantage points. We're going to start with Dr. Rosana Lanzelotte. A few words about her. She is a distinguished musician and holds a PhD in computer science. She did her postdoctoral studies at INRI, as a matter of fact, for a year. And then she started the Musica Brasilis initiative in 2009 to provide web access to Brazilian music repertoires. The website makes available more than 6,000 music scores and is accessed monthly by some 40,000 users. Dr. Lanzelotte was honored as Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres by the French government in 2008. Over to you. So the format is very simple. They give a presentation, each one of them, and afterwards, I'll open the floor in case there are any questions. Over to you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Fackson Banda for inviting me to take part in this event. As you all know, music is a very important part of Brazilian cultural legacy. But only 80% of Brazilian music repertoires are still in manuscript format, not adapted for performances. As a musician myself, I have realized how difficult it was to obtain music scores written by Brazilian composers. That was the reason for creating in 2009 the Musica Brasilis Institute and website, to make available Brazilian music from all times and genres. You can see here a flare of the homepage. Among the highlights at your right, there is Il Guarani, the most famous opera by Carlos Gomes, which is himself the most famous Brazilian opera composer of the 19th century, whose documents have been inscribed in the Memory of the World International Register in 2017. This recognition by UNESCO has entitled Musica Brasilis to the sponsorship by Instituto Cultural Vale and BNDES for the current project, 5,000 new music scores, among which all 9 operas by Carlos Gomes, approximately 10,000 manuscript music pages. The most famous opera, Il Guarani, premiered at Alla Scala Milano in 1870. It's already online. And last year, I had the good news to hear that Musica Brasilis website has been chosen by the Library of Congress Web Archiving Program. The institutions that promoted Carlos Gomes' inscription have made available their manuscript sources. However, preserving and making available the original documents is not enough. Modern editions must be provided for musicians. Music manuscripts should be edited using music notation software to make practical editions meant for performance with separate parts for instruments. Well, I illustrate it there with a manuscript by Carlos Gomes. And you can see that the most used music notation programs are Finale and Sibelius, both proprietary software. This is one main drawback in our domain. There is no trusted open notation software. This is a task for you. Also, MCR, music character recognition, software is lacking for music character recognition. The only existent proprietary software work only for printed scores. AI could help learning how to decode, for example, Tom Jobim's writing automatically. That's another case for you. More and more musicians read music from their tablets, as you can see in this picture. Thus, Musica Brasilis aligns with SDG 11.4, contributed to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural heritage. Going digital makes the resources more accessible and then contributes to the conservation of the originals. Of course, digital preservation should be assured and reuse should be promoted. In order to be effective, web availability should comply with FAIR principles. F stands for findable. Digital resources should be described in a standard way and be identified by persistent identifiers. A for accessible. Digital resources should be stored in trusted repositories with digital preservation. Musica Brasilis counts on IBICT, an official government agency, to provide digital preservation. Interoperable. Metadata should be interchanged with other websites to promote linked open data. And reusable. The resource should be identified by a CC BY license and its provenance should be clear. It would be very expensive to develop software for compliance with linked open data and FAIR principles, as you all know. So for this purpose, we at Musica Brasilis consider Wikidata a solution. You can see here the Wikidata cloud. It could be regarded as a metadata hub connecting major libraries. For example, Bibliothèque Nationale de France, British Library, and the Library of Congress. It also conciliates identifiers connecting different IDs assigned by VIAF, ISNI, Library of Congress, Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and so on. With this respect, Musica Brasilis cooperates with Wikimedia Brazil and exports images of music scores to Wikimedia Commons and composers and works metadata to Wikidata. Since its first implementation, we tried to use existing software, but there was not such concept as software heritage. So we had to build our own solution. However, Musica Brasilis web software could now be used by other initiatives. For example, we have been contacted by the Paraguayan government that intends to develop a website for their music repertoire. Our current software will be adapted for that purpose. I believe that a major outcome of this forum would be to promote this kind of cooperation. Software heritage could be enhanced by the contribution of networks of similar applications. In particular, GLAM institutions, GLAM for galleries, libraries, archive museums, would tremendously benefit from open software for describing and accessing their resources. I think that the Memory of the World Committee is the right forum to discuss and propose these tools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosana. We appreciate your presentation as usual, very passionate about what you do. And I think we find that very valuable as a memory of the world. And that's why your being here is not accidental. The next panelist is Mr. Pierre Pellizzari. He has been the Vice President of IASA, the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, for several years. Since 2018, he has been the IASA delegate to UNESCO. He was the director of the Swiss National Sound Archives from 1998 to 2019. In 2016, he founded IASA's Teaching and Education Committee, which he chaired until 2018. And he is going to share with us his thoughts about the magnetic tape project that IASA has been invested in for some years. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Fackson, for the presentation and also the invitation. As I'm coming from a complete other world, I'm not an IT man. I'm coming from the archive world. So let me go back 2 steps first to introduce you, because the archives are beginning always in the analog world to go to the digital one. Today's knowledge of the linguistic and cultural diversity of humanity is widely based on magnetic tape recordings produced over 70 years. But magnetic audio and videotape formats are now obsolete. The only way to preserve these sounds and images and to keep them accessible for future generations is their digitization and transfer to safe digital repositories. While many professional memory institutions around the world have already secured their audiovisual holdings, or have maybe plans to do so, a great number of audio and video recordings are still in their original state, kept in small academic or cultural institutions like universities, museums, or in private hands. However, it is unclear where these collections are located, how large they are, and what condition they are in. With the Magnetic Tape Alert Project, MTAP, named MTMP, the information for all program IFAP of UNESCO, in cooperation with the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, IASA, has in 2019 and 2020 attempted to alert stakeholders around the world to the imminent threat of losing the access to their audiovisual documents. The project aimed to produce a realistic view of the problem and determine to what extent rescue measures would have to be organized and financed to prevent the loss of irreplaceable documents. The information obtained through a questionnaire should serve as a basis for the planning of adequate solutions for the safeguarding and irreplaceable original documents in the long term. The result of a first survey show a broad spectrum of numerous often unique documents from different areas, and many of them originate from field researches. And we find out it's a lot of music, endangered languages, folklore rituals, dances, oral history, speeches, ceremonies, and so on, but also documentaries and television and radio broadcasts, mainly from small private broadcasters. All these types of audiovisual content are of interest of this project and make part of the documentary heritage. Despite a large number of missing data from numerous countries, especially from Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, the survey produced an impressive number of documents. A total of more than 8.5 million audio and video objects were identified through this project. Now, how to go ahead? Because, as I said, the project has been in 1920, and then we thought to go ahead, but the pandemic stopped all projects in the future. So we try to go ahead now. IASA would like to resume the project. 2 actions are planned for this. Firstly, the survey is to be conducted again in the poorly represented regions I named before. And secondly, preservation projects are to be launched with parallel running training programs. In order to do this, there are some issues to discuss. First of all, on the analogical side, many of the institutions have inadequate or no equipment at all. So they can nor read, nor see, nor hear nothing. In general, the replay equipment in operable conditions is disappearing rapidly, and spare parts supply and services are fading. And with the disappearance of the devices, the knowledge of the handling and manipulation will also be lost. IASA can certainly help with the missing devices, but the question is whether the appropriate equipment can be found for all existing formats. There are open source programs for digitization, but they have the disadvantage that they are not always up to date. I will say they are dependent on the members of the community who works with this software. Another solution could be a mobile digitization equipment. The National Sound Archives of Mexico have a good experience with this. Two technicians, as an example, one from Audio World, another IT, traveled to the archives of mostly private radio stations of the indigenous population. They trained archivists there and digitized with them their audiovisual holdings. A similar project is currently underway in Switzerland, where a portable digitization workstation travels to the archives of private radio stations to transfer their analog holdings. As the audiovisual collections in the institutions concerned are usually not very extensive, this solution has various advantages. First, analog players can be used optimally. Not everyone has to have everything. And the working station is also a standalone system that can be easily relocated. The digitization system in this case is professional and is operated by trained technicians. Suppliers of digitization systems can certainly provide such standalone workstations. A company already offers such a system. It provides both playback devices and the various modules for digitization. However, the software is proprietary, but of course, always up to date. The entire system can be purchased or rented, but it's only one who offers that for the moment. On the other side, the problem of digital archiving at the end we need remains. To resume my brief contribution, the following problems or wishes can be identified. Many archives with audiovisual collections use open source software, mostly for financial reasons, but struggle with following problems. Open source software is not always up to date, or adaptations to future developments to other systems, for example, operating systems, take longer or are missing completely. Open source software is also often less secure. Digital archiving is becoming increasingly complicated, complex systems, which means frequent adjustments for archives, usually at additional costs. It seems to me that the more complicated systems are, the greater risk of vulnerability. I would underline to opposites to paper documents, audiovisual documents can be seen or listened only in digital formats today, as the physical access is no longer possible due to the lack of playback devices, of course. So the digitization, digital archiving, and digital access is the only possibility to preserve and to keep access to these audiovisual documents. We laughed before because the PowerPoint didn't work. Out of memory has been written. If your system of digitization system or digital archive is out of memory, you have a bigger problem. And I think you cannot laugh at that moment. We heard also about the documentation. That's very important. Archives are able to document the content, no problem. But how to document the context? What kind of hardware and software have been used? How can I access to this information? And finally, when we are doing this work now, meanwhile, researchers go ahead to create documents, field researches, whatever, but in digital formats. Everyone in another one. Some of them use open source, others have their own systems, and all this material comes back to the archives. How to give the guarantee that we can preserve all this material? A challenge is, for instance, all the documents created digitally. That is a problem that all archives all over the world have it today. So if you can help us, thank you very much.
Pio was very reluctant to join this panel, so I had to persuade him, tell him, come. He was afraid he would be meeting geeks like you and you would not be friendly. But I said, well, your voice is needed for this community so that they can put a pause on innovation and think about what an ordinary audiovisual activist goes through. And that is exactly the voice that you have added to this debate. And it's important for us. We do not want some of these poor, and most of them are in poor countries, memory institutions to be left behind. You are moving and moving so fast that sometimes the process of innovation is not deliberative. It is technologically deterministic, and that's a problem for us. So your take, I think, tries to put a pause on this so that we think a little bit more about what we are doing. With that, then, let me invite Professor Valérie Schafer. She is a professor in contemporary European history at the Center for Contemporary and Digital History at the University of Luxembourg. She is also still an associate researcher at the Center for Internet and Society. She specializes in the history of computing, telecommunications, and data networks. Her main research interests are the history of the internet and the web, the history of European digital cultures and infrastructures, and born digital heritage, especially web archives. She's currently supervising a PhD dissertation on the topic of code as a source for historians. Over to you.
Thank you, Fackson. And I must confess, yeah, you had not convinced me. I was so enthusiastic in joining today, but it doesn't mean I'm not afraid of talking in front of you. But it was so evident that I wanted also to join this meeting, as I must admit, I'm really so happy about this initiative, about software heritage. First, as a researcher, we talk already about fair data, and I think it's really, a model. You have everything which is compatible and compliant with fair data. For us, it's so important as researchers to have, for example, unique identifiers to quote also code source, as we have at the BNF for web archives, also to be able to quote and to use this kind of heritage. You also write in your statement that you openly describe your technical architecture and processes, and to be able to go also in the shadows, in the process, because born digital heritage is always, as explained by the historian Niels Brugger, a reborn digital heritage. It's not so easy. You can't take just born digital heritage, maybe web archives, coder, and that's all. And it's very important to document also the processes. You have also an open governance model, and this is also something key. You can't be transparent, you can't provide fair data if you don't have also a community of peers and an open model of governance. And I'm very sensitive to all these aspects. But I'm also very sensitive to one, which is also enlightened in the Memory of the World program, which is to increase awareness worldwide of the existence and significance of documentary heritage. You have education goals, you have ambassadors, you have also communities that are able to disseminate this awareness about the importance of this heritage. And now it is less as a researcher, but as a teacher and as a citizen that I want also to talk. Everybody knows this statement by Laurent Lessig, code is law. We can discuss at length about it, but if we take it a bit seriously, and we can, when we see, for example, the Parcoursup code source, when we think about the study by Marc Marino in his book, I will come back to it or immediately show it to you. In this book, Critical Code Studies is coming back to this controversy in the UK, but it was going far much broader about the climate gate and how in UK there were discussion and controversies about climate change related to the code of modeling climate change in the future and how the code became a political, of course, discussion. And Marino goes further. He explains, analyzing culture through code will include discussions that may be related, I cut a bit the sentence, but to gender, sexuality, political representation, ideology, and so on. Because the walls of the computer do not remove code from the world, but encode the world and human bias. There is, of course, politics in code source. It is very important, and the book by Marino is also related to all this movement of research, algorithm of operation by Safia Noble, or data feminism, and so on. So this heritage is part of engaging citizens with more combative, I would say, data tactics, but also code tactics, and also being able to understand the world, the tools, and the environment in which they are evolving. So this is something that is, I guess, very important, and this heritage is an heritage for everybody and is a mirror also of human current life. You can, of course, answer me, everybody is not able to read code. Currently not. It doesn't mean we don't have to educate people at least to understand the basis of what coding means, what are data, what are algorithms, and so on. But maybe in 50 years, in 70 years, every citizen will be also able to read code. We don't know how education will evolve, and with AI and so on, I guess it is time also to put this clearly on the table. Let me also move to one other point, because Fackson, you invited us also to think a bit about the connection between our work and software source code as an object of study of our research, and I'm more on web archives for sure, but I remember precisely when I discovered this book by Clarice Ehrenschmidt, which was written in 2007, Les Trois Écritures. It was so interesting, putting also the history of code in a longer term perspective. I perfectly remember also in 2017, Roberto, that we met for an interview for the Société Informatique de France and a journal related to also informatics. And I was excited about discovering this project that was not entirely starting. It was already in the highway of heritage, but it has evolved so much since then. And I see that in SSH, there is clearly a shift, a turn to this study of code as source. I give you just a few examples, and I can't see the screen from there, but yeah, the seminar organized by the Cambridge Digital Humanities team, which is digging into code source and discussing it from several perspectives, computing, sociology, and so on. Two PhD theses that were very important this year, the one by Gabriela Alcaraz and the one by Pierre Despaz, and I need to stop in a few seconds, that are going into for Gabriel Alcaraz into Git and the writing of code, and for Pierre Depaz into the aesthetics of code. Our colleague from the University of Milano has also shown that there are works since a lot of years, and in this room we have people like Elisabetta Mori, like Mathilde Fichen, and others that contribute or will also contribute to this knowledge and research, and are providing a lot. I just want to finish with one sentence related to my field of study, so studying web archives and looking at web pages, but why not looking at what is hidden? Here is the case of Internet Archive, providing access to how the page is written. And I see a lot of interesting examples I won't have time to develop, but that we could do in the study of web archives, and it relates to an initiative you had at the Software Heritage, which is also to gather people to discuss how to narrate also and explain this history of codes. And some people in the room will recognize what they did because Isabelle Astig, Jean-François Abramatic, and the others contributed to this workshop. This is also a history of video games. This is a history of the first page of the web. This is an history of popular cultures, of media cultures, and so on. So there is so much potential in this heritage that, yeah, I'm looking forward to the next step and hope to contribute also to them.
Thank you so much, Professor Schafer. I value your critical reading of coding. I think it does help us, in a sense, to democratize the whole process, of coding, which sometimes happens in garages and so on and so forth, insulated from the prying eyes of the people. By opening it up, we understand the cultural ramifications, the political ramifications, the commercial ramifications even. So we value the kind of research that you're doing, and it helps us in constructing a kind of memory that we want to celebrate, even as we try to link it to the development of software. Finally, then, I would like to invite my colleague, Prateek Sibal, who is a program specialist in the digital policies and digital transformation section of the communication and information sector here at UNESCO. In his capacity, he leads the sector's work on artificial intelligence and digital transformation with a focus on capacity building for the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. His work spans research, advocacy, policy advice, and capacity building for the governance of digital technologies. Over to you.
Thank you, Fackson, for having me here. Hi, everyone. So my intervention is coming from also, as Fackson shared, a slightly different background, which is working with policymakers and primarily on digital transformation. And when Fackson told me about this conference, the brief was, how can we think of other perspectives on which software heritage can be thought of also as a forward-looking aspect on how can we use this for new digital transformation development. So that's something that I will focus on. I don't know how many of you are here familiar with digital public goods and these terminologies which are being used in the UN quite a bit these days. I see a couple of hands. Oh, okay, there are quite a few people, so that's great. So I'll start first with the idea of government as a platform, right? We've been talking about this since almost 20 years now, about how to transform governments. And the idea is that governments set up rules of interactions, make data available, and then the kind of innovation crowds in to provide services and products. Just as an example, for instance, in the transportation sector, if you make available the data on timing of public transport, then people can develop services and products which can help you map, okay, the scheduling issues, and government itself doesn't need to offer a lot of these services. within this broader movement of government as a platform, we've also seen, as was mentioned before, also code as law, or what others are also calling rules as code. And this approach is really taking how can we translate the legislative intent from governments into actual usable code. So there is less of a difference between what was intended in the legislation and the actual application. Another instance, an example of this kind of an approach is, of course, what some especially in some developing countries like India, are talking about as a techno-legal approach to digital transformation, where they are really talking about how governments can provide protocols or rules of exchange and play to allow the private sector to come in, for civil society to come in and develop solutions. And there are several examples of this approach. For instance, in India, they've developed protocols to facilitate exchange of data, or even in the banking sector, or the whole system which is built around digital ID, payments, and so on. And initially, as an example, it was the public sector banks who were really responsible for transfer of funds and so on. But now with these newer protocols and digital public infrastructure, you have non-banking institutions who've come into this sector and are offering services. So there are a lot of these opportunities, and the benefits are quite clear. We see, if we define with this kind of digital infrastructure, which is based on these rules, it translates the legislative intent clearly. You can have the private sector or civil society, other stakeholders come in and develop solutions. So it's not only the government, which is the be all and end all. It creates a level playing field, so there are less entry barriers, which is, of course, at the heart of openness as well. There are also limitations to this approach. The serious challenges of exclusion of users when the government is going wholesale on digital platforms or protocols, because we need to also think about digital connectivity and access issues in a lot of developing country contexts. There is also this challenge of trying to automate functions of government. To give you a concrete example, if you are supposed to access your food rations using, say, a digital ID system which authenticates and proves who you are, and this biometric authentication, for instance, fails, then you may be denied your rations. And there are a lot of these kind of outlier cases which sometimes are difficult to account for in the public sector, and this can have serious consequences on people's lives as well. So, and finally, there is this idea of eliminating last mile bureaucracy, because a lot of these public services are delivered by bureaucrats, the long arm of the state, which also have a certain leeway to decide. But if you are going with this approach of rules as code and so on, there is very little leeway. So these are some of the limitations. But linking back to software heritage, I think the great work and the archives that you have, there are movements at the UN level. For instance, there's the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which has come together to find all these different solutions, which can be, for instance, developed in the Gambia and can be implemented in India or whatever, as a repository. But there is a lot that you already have in terms of protocols, in terms of code, in terms of solutions which may be useful for the public sector. And it could be quite useful to actually be able to find them by public sector uses and link it to governments. Okay, these are the use cases, these are things that already work, and we can make them more accessible, findable, and so on. So I think this would be kind of my also plea to look at this, and we'd be very happy to exchange further, because when we are advising governments, we have a limitation. We can't say, oh, use this or that, but we can make them available a set of solutions. And since there is this beautiful work that you've been doing for so many years, I think it could be quite powerful as a tool in this domain. I'll stop here and happy to have the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you, Prateek. I appreciate that. So we don't have much time. One or two questions or observations from the floor. Anybody? You?
Okay. I'll break the ice. So thanks a lot, Raphaël, for this call or plea that you mentioned. Actually, we are working in software to have a way of sharing metadata about existing software, and there is exactly one application for public administration that needs more work and more love, but we will be more than happy to discuss this together and forward this in future conversation. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's conclude then. And I'll give you, 30 seconds each to give us, your takeaway point, not only from this panel, but from the other discussions that you have had today. And then we'll be done. So let's start with you, Prateek.
Well, I think there is a lot of work to be done, and we'd be happy to engage with you on the public sector aspect of things to build this also as an offering, a concrete tool that they can use. And I think for us, this would be fantastic to discuss. Yeah.
Yeah.
As in the past, the archives has been more quite independent, I can say, in their work. We are becoming more and more dependent of hard and software industry, depending of these developments, and we have to follow with the training, how to use them, and so on. Just a little story. I visited a composer who is making music with computer. And he explained me the software he uses. It has a part of open source, then he bought some others, and then he developed also things and so on. If you like the music, it's another question coming out from the computer. Then he passed away, and the widow came to me and said, would you like to safeguard his archive, his music he made? That, oh, of course, here is his computer. And then, okay.
I'm very happy to be here, and as part of the GLAM community, I propose that Software Heritage proposes tools to make our archives and resources available to everybody. And as one is aware that Bibliothèque Nationale de France developed its own software for its catalog, I think this is an example that we should perhaps make this more democratic and usable by the community. Thank you.
Yeah, as we are moving faster and faster, but with a model of development which is no more sustainable, I'm very happy to see also people capitalizing on the existing and taking care of not just innovation. It was a buzzword, but no, it's also time to think about maintenance, heritage, and so on. And also maintenance, heritage, and the others, they require a lot of innovation for sure, but it's time also to value this type of initiatives much more than it was in the past. Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Another round of applause. Thank you.